When Consul Varus of the Saurian hegemony stepped out of his sleek ship onto Earth soil, his resignation notice was already drafted, and his asylum request prepped. But the humans surrounding him had no idea of the impending shitstorm. The cynical but curious human, David Allen, had been assigned as Varus's liaison. As they stood facing each other amidst the tense crowd gathered for this momentous first contact, David tried to get a read on the lanky reptilian humanoid. "Welcome to Earth, Consul Varus," David said politely, extending a hand. "I'm David Allen, your guide during your visit." Varus looked at the offered hand for a moment, then reached out a clawed appendage and shook it firmly. "Thank you, David Allen. I look forward to experiencing all your planet has to offer." As they climbed into the hover car sent to transport them, David couldn't help but notice Varus craning his elongated neck to stare wide-eyed out the windows. The consul seemed positively giddy, emitting clicking noises that the translation unit rendered as gasps of awe and delight. "Are you all right, Consul?" David asked, perplexed. "They were just passing trees and some pigeons, nothing exciting." "All right? I'm astounded!" Varus exclaimed. "Such biodiversity, and those flying creatures, so many different types. On Saria, we only have a few species of small avians, and they're all gray. But these, such colors." As they drove through New York City, Varus's amazement only grew. He gazed up at the towering skyscrapers, utterly dumbfounded by their scale and variety of architectural styles. The streets pulsed with life. Food carts, buskers, protests, celebrations. The sheer vibrant chaos of it all left Varus in shock. "Your civilization is so dynamic, alive. How do you accomplish so much on your own, without strict central planning? The diversity of thought, of culture, it's overwhelming, incredible." David shrugged. "That's humanity for you? We're a messy, raucous bunch, always striving, inventing, creating, destroying, changing. For better or worse, stagnation just isn't our thing." Over the next few days, David took Varus on a whirlwind tour of human marvels. Museums, performances, restaurants, labs. With each new wonder, the consul grew more jittery and distracted, peppering David with ever more urgent questions. "How do you feed so many? How do you fuel such rapid progress? How do you maintain order without rigid social stratification?" As David shared the good and bad of human history and culture, he slowly pieced together the truth from Varus's frustrated rants. Saria was a dying world, locked into stagnation by oppressive authoritarianism and dwindling resources, a far cry from Earth's verdant, riotous glory. So really, he shouldn't have been surprised when it all came to a head at the UN. There they were, about to sign the agreement opening diplomatic relations, when Varus abruptly stood up and hurled his official tablet to the floor. "I quit," he declared, his voice ringing through the stunned assembly hall. "I hereby relinquish my post as consul, effective immediately, so I can join the humans and actually live." The scene erupted into pandemonium. The Saurian delegation hissed in outrage, demanding Varus return at once. The human leaders shouted over each other in confusion, and at the center of it all stood Varus, a desperate, inspired gleam in his large eyes. "I formally request asylum on Earth," the rogue consul cried out over the din. "The hegemony is sterile, dying. Humanity is the future. I wish to embrace the chaos and create a real life here." David buried his face in his hands as the room exploded. He peeked out between his fingers to see the Saurian guards advancing on Varus, only to be blocked by the human security forces. In a flash, he realized 3 things. 1, that asylum paperwork Varus shoved at him earlier wasn't hypothetical. 2, this bewildering turn of events would be the biggest interstellar clusterfuck in history. And 3, as the poor schmuck assigned to alien relations, he'd be the one stuck in the middle of it. Ah, well, he'd wanted to stave off boredom and leave a mark on the universe. As the first shots rang out, David sighed, cracked his knuckles, and waded in to try to keep this first contact from turning into a first war. At least life wouldn't be dull. As the smoke cleared from the opening salvo of the interstellar diplomatic crisis, David found himself in the eye of a shitstorm of truly galactic proportions. The Saurian leaders were absolutely livid, demanding Varys be hauled back immediately to face the music for his treasonous stunt. They wanted his scaly hide, and they wanted it now. But Varys? The crazy bastard was having none of it. He planted himself firmly on Earth soil. Well, linoleum, if we're being technical. What with him being holed up in the UN building and all, and refused to budge. "I've found my calling here among the humans," he declared, his reptilian features set in a defiant scowl. "I wish to learn from their dynamic ways and forge a new path. I will not return to the stagnation of Saria." Well, that set the diplomatic corps into a right tizzy. Emergency sessions out the wazoo, with David smack in the middle trying to juggle Earth's interests and Varys' asylum plea. The Saurians were on the warpath, threatening to cut off every trade deal and sanction us back to the Stone Age if we didn't hand over their renegade consul. They were hurling accusations that we'd brainwashed the poor sap, filling his head with radical notions that threatened to upend their nice, orderly, read, totalitarian society. Meanwhile, back on the home front, Varys was blowing up like a supernova. The media couldn't get enough of the guy. His childlike wonder at every human quirk and his impassioned speeches about seeking asylum had the public eating out of his clawed hand. Support groups were popping up left and right to champion his cause. Of course, not everyone was thrilled at the prospect of adopting a stray lizard man. Plenty of folks were pissing themselves at the thought that his little rebellion could drag us into an interstellar war we were in no shape to fight. David? He was just trying to keep everything from exploding. So, of course, that's when shit really hit the fan. See, our boy Varys' little adventure had some unintended consequences back on Saria. Turns out the stories of his defection and life on liberated Earth had lit a fire under some rebel factions who'd had it up to their eye ridges with the rigid caste system and cultural stagnation, whatever the fuck that means. So now, the Saurian leadership was losing their collective shit trying to put down the budding uprising. And Varys, bless his guilt-ridden heart, decides he needs to fix the mess he caused. The mad lad comes to David with this batshit insane plan to waltz back home, revolutionary human ideals in tow, and sweet-talk his people into embracing change and opening up to us, enlightened Terrans. Oh, and he wants David to tag along for the ride. Never mind that they'd be walking straight into the jaws of the regime that branded Varys a traitor. But David, he's always been a bit of a dreamer. He looks at this clusterfuck and sees a chance to make history, to guide an entire civilization into a new age and build one hell of an alliance. So against every shred of common sense, he agrees to strap in for this crazy last-ditch diplomatic Hail Mary. As they prep for the big show, all he can think is this shit could go one of two ways. Either they pull off the impossible and bridge the gap between two worlds, kicking off a new era of cooperation and rainbows and Wookiee-Saurian cuddle puddles, or it all blows up in their faces and take human-Saurian relations down in flames with it. But hey, no risk, no reward, right? The shuttle touched down with a muffled thud in a dingy alleyway on the outskirts of the Saurian capital. David's heart raced as the hatch hissed open, revealing a group of hooded figures waiting in the shadows. "Quickly," one of them hissed, gesturing urgently. "The patrols will be back soon." David and Varys hurried out, hunched low as they followed their guides through a dizzying maze of narrow streets. The acrid stench of industrial runoff assaulted David's nostrils as they splashed through putrid puddles. Twice they froze in doorways as armed patrols stomped past, David's pulse pounding in his ears. Finally, they reached a dilapidated apartment block. One of the dissidents tapped out an intricate rhythm on a rusty door, which swung open to reveal a cramped but mercifully clean safe house. "We made it," Varys sighed, his scales glistening with nervous sweat. He turned to address the gathered rebels. "Thank you all for risking everything to help us. Now let me outline our next move." As Varys laid out his audacious plan, David noticed the dissidents exchanging uneasy glances. "Consul," one of them interrupted, "you must understand. You and the human are now Saria's most wanted. There's a shoot-on-sight order for you both. What you're proposing is suicide. Varys's eyes blazed with purpose. Then so be it. I'd rather die speaking truth than live another day in silent oppression. Over the next hours, they hunkered down to prepare Varys's manifesto. David watched in awe as the former consul poured his heart into every word, painting a vivid picture of a freer, more vibrant Saria. When they finished, one of the tech-savvy rebels patched into pirated data feeds. We're live across all channels in 3, 2, 1. Varys took a deep breath and began to speak. His impassioned words rang out across the planet, a clarion call for change that set Saria ablaze. The reaction was swift and fierce. Within hours, the streets erupted into chaos. Throngs of protesters filled city squares, their voices rising in a thunderous chant for freedom. But the regime's iron fist came down hard. Security forces swarmed the streets, clubbing and arresting dissenters en masse. As days passed in a blur of frenetic planning and narrow escapes, David watched their allies vanish one by one, arrested or worse. Soon, only he and Varys remained, two unlikely fugitives united in a daring plan to reshape an alien world. Their final dash for the central communications hub was a nightmare gauntlet. They sprinted through fetid slums, dodging pockets of rioters and trigger-happy security squads. David's lungs burned as he vaulted over makeshift barricades, the acrid sting of tear gas filling the air. At last, they reached the towering spire of the comm center. With trembling hands, Varys bypassed the security systems as alarms blared. They burst into the control room, David slamming the door shut behind them as the sound of boots thundered up the stairs. Varys's claws flew across the control panel. A red light blinked on, signaling they were live across the planet. He turned to the camera, scales gleaming with sweat and eyes alight with revolutionary fire. "People of Soria," he began, voice steady despite the pounding at the door. "The time has come to cast off the chains of oppression and embrace a new dawn." "People of Soria," Varys began, voice steady despite the pounding at the door. "The time has come to cast off the chains of oppression and embrace a new future." David's pulse raced as he watched Varys deliver his speech. The former consul's words flowed with passion, painting a vision of a Saria free from rigid castes and stagnation. Outside, chaos engulfed the capital. Explosions echoed in the distance as their dissident allies created diversions to buy time. "We must seize this moment," Varys urged. "Look to Earth as an example. Their society thrives on diversity, on the freedom to innovate and create. We too can forge a new path forward, one of progress and openness." The broadcast galvanized the swelling protest movement. Crowds in the streets swelled, their chants for reform growing louder. But the regime's response was swift and brutal. David's blood ran cold as reports flooded in of military forces mobilizing. "Varys, we need to go. Now." The Saurian's eyes blazed with purpose. "Not yet. We can't stop now." A deafening explosion rocked the building. Smoke filled the corridor outside as loyalist troops stormed in. "Shit," David hissed. He grabbed Varys and dove behind a console as weapons fire shredded the room. Varys reached up, claws flying over the controls. "There! It's on a loop now. My words will keep broadcasting." They crawled toward the exit, staying low as bullets whizzed overhead. David kicked open a side door, revealing a maintenance passage. "This way." They sprinted down the cramped corridor. David's lungs burned as they raced through a maze of service tunnels. Behind them, the shouts of pursuing soldiers grew closer. Daylight spilled in as they burst out a side entrance. But their relief was short-lived. A hail of weapons fire erupted from a nearby security checkpoint. "Down!" Varys cried, shoving David aside. The Saurian's body jerked as multiple rounds struck him. He stumbled, scales slick with blood. "Varys!" David grabbed his friend, half carrying him as they fled down winding alleys. Hours later, they huddled in a dingy safe house. Varys lay on a cot, his breathing labored as a rebel medic tended his wounds. Outside, the city burned. Varys's words continued to echo from comm towers and hacked feeds, fueling the unrest spreading across the planet. David paced anxiously. We underestimated them. The regime won't give up without a fight. A thunderous explosion shook the building. Shouts and weapons fire erupted on the street below. They found us, a rebel scout cried. We're surrounded. David helped Varys to his feet as they retreated deeper into the crumbling structure. Walls splintered around them as heavy weapons pounded their position. A grimy datapad crackled to life. A gravelly voice spoke. Need a way out, mammals? I can get you off-world. For a price. David's mind raced. This could be their only chance. But could he really abandon the revolution they'd started? He looked at Varys, seeing the conflict in his friend's eyes. Stay and likely die, or flee and live to fight another day. The building shook again. They were out of time. David had to choose. David grunted as he hauled Varys's limp form through the twisted wreckage of the safe house. Acrid smoke stung his eyes and throat. The Saurian's blood left a dark trail on the cracked pavement. Stay with me, David urged, his voice hoarse. They stumbled into a dank alley. Distant sirens wailed. David propped Varys against a grimy wall and tore strips from his shirt to bind the wounds. Leave me, Varys gasped. Save yourself. Not a chance in hell, David growled. He dragged Varys deeper into the underworld. They passed hunched figures in doorways who averted their eyes. Finally, David kicked open the door of an abandoned shop. Inside, he laid Varys on a filthy mattress. The Saurian's scales were pale, his breathing labored. David worked frantically to staunch the bleeding. A sharp rap at the door made him freeze. He gripped a jagged piece of metal, ready to fight. Open up, a gravelly voice demanded. Your ride's here. David cracked the door. A grizzled smuggler stood outside, tapping a stunner impatiently. We gotta move, now. He needs medical attention, David protested. The smuggler sneered. Not my problem. Ship leaves in 10 minutes, with or without you. Varys stirred, his eyes glassy. David, the people, we can't abandon them. David knelt beside his friend. Varys, you'll die if we stay. Then I die for something that matters, Varys wheezed. The smuggler stomped his foot. Tick-tock, mammals. David paced, running his hands through his hair. Just give us a minute. Time is credits, the smuggler snapped. And I ain't. The wall exploded inward. David was thrown across the room. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard the chatter of weapons fire. He scrambled to his feet. The smuggler lay dead, half his head vaporized. Armored troops poured through the breach. David dove behind an overturned table. His hand closed on the smuggler's stunner. He popped up, squeezing off wild shots that dropped 2 soldiers. More troops pushed in. David glanced at Varys, saw the fire in his friend's eyes. In that moment, he knew there was only one choice. He lunged for the control panel by the door. His fingers flew over the keys, patching into the broadcast network. Varys's defiant words filled the air once more. People of Soria, the time for change is now. David helped Varys to his feet. They shared a look of grim purpose. Ready for one last stand? David asked. Varys nodded. For freedom. They raised their weapons as the Loyalists breached the final barrier. In the streets beyond, the sounds of battle erupted.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.